So I don't think it takes much for people to get in a pretty heated discussion about I'm religious but not spiritual, spiritual but not religious, and about every combination in between. But at the heart of this conversation and debate is the desire to experience some sort of transfiguration, our own transfiguration. Because regardless of the terminology we use, what we seek out and desire is a sense of the transcendent, the holy, something outside of ourselves, that power that is greater than ourselves, that causes awe and wonder and hope and an experience of love. And regardless of how we understand that power that is greater than ourselves, there is a need to know transfiguration in our own lives. And it matters. It matters because lives are changed, and the ripple effect of that change is beyond measure. I went to get my hair cut this week from one of our alumni who just moved into having like her own chair. And I saw this beautiful woman whose life has been transfigured through this program of recovery. And I watched and listened as this woman of grace stood in front of me, a much different person than I met 5 years ago. When I met her as she came into the gates of Cumberland Heights, she was still holding on tight to her addiction. And it was not an easy road, but I saw such tremendous beauty and grace in her. And I saw it this week in a Facebook post from one of our staff who works in admissions, and I asked her if I could share this with you all this morning. The cover picture on her Facebook page says, "I can and I will. Watch me." And this young woman is doing just that, with the fellowship of this program supporting her and cheering her along the way. And what stood out to me so much with her this week is that she sent out a request asking how she could get her old mugshots for a project that she's working on for school. And she found them, and she posted 3 of her mugshots that were from a few years ago. And her own description says, "I needed to pick up some of my old mugshots today for a class project I am doing on my life. And I couldn't help but feel true, overwhelming gratitude while looking through them. Thank God I don't live like that anymore. This is the look of death." And that is what stood out to me with those pictures, the look of death, that look of death in her eyes. This disease of addiction wants to steal the soul. It wants to steal the spirit of someone, and it just leaves a shell of a person. And you can see that look of death in her eyes. But what you see today is a transfigured person shining and dazzling with the light of God. She has a smile and a sparkle in her eyes that absolutely light up a room. She's in college. She works here. She's engaged. And she is a light in this fellowship that offers love and support to others who are trying to find that light within themselves again. She has been transfigured by this program. I thought of Karen this week too, of seeing that light and her transfiguration and how that has flowed through her family and all of them being a light. Transfiguration matters, and we need transfiguration. I think we get into these spiritual and religious debates because we are searching. We are searching to feel and experience and find that connection with something greater than ourselves that sets our heart ablaze, that fills our spirits to the brim till we shine and dazzle with love and light and hope. And this reading this morning is not just about Jesus' revelation of his glory, but the fact that we wish for our own sense of glory. Not an egotistical or self-centered kind that is so tightly attached with addiction, but that recognition of a deep human need for transformation, that deep human need for change. a makeover, a metamorphosis. We need transfiguration in our own life as much as Jesus needed to be transfigured in our reading this morning. The transfiguration in our reading is a turning point. It's a transition from one way of seeing Jesus to another, and it points to the real human struggle with change, with transformation. And isn't that what so much of this journey with Cumberland Heights involves? That struggle with change. Understanding how this disease works, developing a willingness to follow the suggestions of the program, practicing honesty, working through the steps, and learning how to turn your life and will over to a power greater than yourself are all pieces of that change. Transformation is hard. Change is hard. Traversing from one way of being to another. It's difficult, and it's difficult for those who have had to protect themselves from that old person to now begin to see someone in a new light. Change can be hard because the old way of living has become familiar and in some ways comfortable. Even in the chaos and turmoil, there is still a kind of predictability in that chaos. The unknown can be scarier than the chaos and turmoil of addiction because that little voice of addiction, which sometimes doesn't sound so little, can convince a person that what you've become in addiction is all that you can become or will be. So it's easier to stay the same, to stay the course of addiction and be convinced that that's just the way it is. And this is why transfiguration matters, because it shows up. And there's no right time. It just happens because it's on God's time. And no amount of planning can predict the right kind of change, because change happens because a power greater than yourself gets into those nooks and crannies that seem to have died and brings light and hope and love and transformation. And then the work begins. The work of learning how to live into the 12 steps, how to practice the spiritual principles of this program in our daily lives, and how to love those who may be in a different place than we are in our own transfiguration. And maybe this is where we can learn from Peter. Peter may not be as much about holding Jesus to his expectations, but instead he's recognizing that if he really acknowledges those changes he is seeing and experiencing, then he will be changed as well. Caroline Lewis writes a reflection in the words of Peter of what it may have been like for him in that moment. I cannot be the same. I will also be transfigured and transformed. And maybe I don't want that. So let's pitch some tents and keep things the way they are, hunker down and ride it out. Maybe this whole thing will just pass by. I can come out of my tent and things will be the same. Jesus will be the same, and I will still be the same. To me, this is the importance of recognizing that this disease of addiction is a family disease. It affects everyone in the family, and each person gets the opportunity to discover what their recovery journey will look like. So I think we can understand Peter's fear. Transfiguration means exposure, and it means becoming vulnerable. And vulnerability is less than comfortable, but it's absolutely necessary for life and for a life of faith and spiritual growth. When we exchange vulnerability for certainty, all we do is live the lie that authenticity doesn't matter, that the truth of who we are as spiritual beings, as God's beloved, can be absconded by addiction, by fear, by those critics in our head that tell us that we are less than. So we put down our tents and we pound in those stakes and we hide in our tents. Those tents that get built are not just about shelter. Oftentimes they may have been originally constructed to keep out that which might harm us. But in the end, they also keep out what is trying to come in and heal us. transform us. God's transfiguration in our lives will rip those tents into shreds. We don't need them anymore because we are being filled with the love of God and we are being filled with the promises of this program. And transfiguration means change. It means a new way of seeing the world and a new way of living in the world. Transfiguration not only signals change, but it also alters life's direction. It brings light back into the eyes of someone who has walked in the shadows of death. It brings hope, and it brings dreams back into reality. It transforms lives, and it brings love. Love for God, love for self, love for life, love for others. Transfiguration awaits us. If you are the comforter, if you have been the caretaker, maybe the transfiguration comes by you acknowledging openly and honestly your own suffering and confusion. If you are struggling with this disease of addiction, the transfiguration awaits when you seek the presence and wisdom of those who have traveled this road before you. This transfiguration awaits when you seek out the presence of the God of your understanding and allow that presence to guide your life. When that happens, you will be changed, and you will glow, and you will sparkle with the dazzling presence of God through the promises of recovery. Amen.